So how far does a president's power to pardon really go? I mean, can it reach beyond criminal courts and into the day-to-day business of government officials? Well, back in 1991, a high-stakes political battle in the Philippines forced the Supreme Court to answer that very question. And let me tell you, their decision still echoes today.
And this is the absolute heart of the matter. Just imagine this for a second. A governor is found guilty of misconduct and gets suspended from office. Now, this is an administrative penalty, not a criminal conviction. So, can the president just step in, grant clemency, and cut that suspension short? That's the exact legal mystery we are going to unpack.
So, how did a huge constitutional question like this even come up? It didn't start in a fancy courtroom or a law school. Nope. This whole thing started right in the middle of a seriously heated political fight in the province of Tarlac.
Let's meet the main players. On one side, you've got Governor Mariano Ocampo. He was accused of some pretty serious misconduct, all tied to a massive 20 million peso loan from the provincial government, and that loan went to a private foundation that he himself was the chairman of. And on the other side, we have Vice Governor Rodolfo Llamas. He's the one who filed the complaint, and, well, he was also the guy next in line for the governor's seat.
Now, things started moving incredibly fast, like a political whirlwind. In September of 1990, Governor Ocampo was found guilty, gets hit with a 90-day suspension. By March of the next year, Vice Governor Llamas is sworn in as the acting governor. But just 2 months later, bam, the president grants Ocampo executive clemency. Suddenly, Ocampo is back in his office, and as you can imagine, a furious Llamas decides to take this fight all the way to the highest court in the land.
And this is the moment. This is where a local political dispute completely blows up into a major constitutional showdown. The entire case, everything, hinged on how you interpret one single sentence in the Philippine Constitution.
The key phrase was, after conviction by final judgment. Now, both sides agreed these words were critical, but they had completely different ideas about what they actually meant.
Okay, so Llama's team, they argued for a really strict, narrow reading. They said, look, the word conviction belongs in the criminal justice system. It's a courtroom word, therefore the president's clemency power is strictly for criminal cases, period. But the government argued for a much broader interpretation. They said, hold on, the Constitution doesn't say the power is only for criminal cases. The only explicit exception listed is for impeachment. So their thinking was, if the framers wanted to exclude administrative cases, they would have just said so.
So, with two really compelling but totally opposite arguments on the table, how did the Supreme Court settle it? Well, their verdict was going to be a landmark decision no matter which way they went. The court's first big reason was based on this classic legal principle, ubi lex non distinguit, nec nos distinguere debamus. Now, it's a Latin phrase, but it basically just means, if the law doesn't make a distinction, we shouldn't either. The court's logic was pretty simple. Since the Constitution doesn't specifically limit this clemency power to criminal cases, they weren't about to add that limitation themselves.
But they didn't even stop there. The court brought in a second, and you could argue, even more powerful argument. And this one is rooted in the president's fundamental role as the head of the whole executive branch. It's called the power of control.
So, what is this power of control? The easiest way to think about it is that the president is the ultimate boss of the executive branch. This power means they can essentially substitute their own judgment for that of anyone who works for them. Remember, the decision to suspend Governor Ocampo was made by the Secretary of Local Government, a subordinate. So the court reasoned that under this power alone, the president had every right to modify that decision, which is exactly what happened when the 90-day suspension got cut short.
But, and this is really important to remember, this was not a unanimous decision. To get the full picture, we have to look at the justices who disagreed, because their arguments, wow, they really highlight the deep complexities of this whole issue.
Two justices wrote these powerful dissents. Justice Cruz actually agreed with the final outcome, but for a totally different reason. He felt the president's power of control was so clear-cut that the court didn't even need to get into a debate about clemency. But Justice Padilla, on the other hand, strongly disagreed with the majority's entire premise. He argued that the phrase conviction by final judgment is an unmistakable reference to the criminal justice system, and that stretching it to cover administrative penalties was a really dangerous misinterpretation of the Constitution.
So, what's the lasting legacy of this case? Why are we still talking about a political fight from 1991? Well, it's because its conclusion fundamentally shaped and continues to shape the scope of presidential power in the Philippines.
The crucial takeaway here is that the Llamas versus Orbos ruling really did two things. First, it confirmed that yes, the president's clemency power extends to administrative cases inside the executive branch. And second, and this is perhaps even more important, it powerfully reinforced the president's power of control, basically affirming their authority to directly step in and alter the decisions of their own department heads.
And you know, all of this leaves us with a really profound question, one that echoes through any presidential system. This case drew a clear line, affirming broad executive power. But it also forces us to constantly ask, in a government that's all about checks and balances, where does that necessary authority end, and where does the potential for executive overreach begin? That tension, right there, is at the very heart of what presidential power is all about.